because you have not just individual hinge moments, but whole societies have hinge moments.
Yeah.
And certainly the pandemic would represent a societal hinge moment. So
Mm.
it starts with discernment. So there,
Hmm.
we begin to get sort of a sense that something change may be afoot. I describe it in the book as sort of a holy restlessness. So at the individual level, it might be, you're kind of bored in your current job, or you're sort of intrigued with the idea of moving across the country,
Mm.
or you're thinking about adopting a kid who's become important in your life. These become sort
Mm.
of signals that something might
Yeah.
occur. And then it gradually transitions into a sense of anticipation that, oh man, something really could happen here. We could really
Hmm.
have that element. So for the pandemic, I'd say the discernment begins when we start hearing about news stories coming out of China in
Yeah.
late 2019, early 2020, and how they were locking down cities, locking down
Right.
Wuhan,
Hmm.
and how Wuhan becomes sort of a framework. And then we begin hearing about
Yeah.
people getting sick in places like Seattle and New York City. And then gradually it begins, we start anticipating, hey, this might actually affect me. It's not just something that happens in another
Mm.
city. Eventually, the third stage of transition is when you sort of hit a low point, what I call the
Mm.
intersection phase. And that's when you realize, hey, something really is going to be different here. And so,
Yeah.
whether it's we're closing our schools or that people's livelihoods are going to change, but we all came to grips in mid March of 2020 that this pandemic was a big deal. And
Yeah.
we thought originally that it was going to be a 2 week sort of process of
Right.
a real
Right.
change. It turned out to be a 2 year process, but
Yeah.
there was a recognition that things were going to be really different. And I'd say, people began to hit a low spot. That
Hmm.
intersection phase is oftentimes when you have your lowest degree of confidence and your lowest degree of support. So
Hmm.
people are beginning to feel isolated, and they're wondering, how long is this going to happen? Eventually, however, you sort of make a move out of that, and we begin landing to a new reality. I'd say that
Mm.
became the process of where we as a society said, okay, we're going to have to open back up. Schools are going to have to find a way to manage. And so whether it's online learning or it's people commuting, telecommuting for work, but there's sort of a new reality begins to develop. And then there's sort of an integration phase where your old life begins to sort of become integrated with your new life. And you start to
Yeah.
say, okay, well, how are these things connected? It's like when you make a move across the country, you begin to visit a church, you start to, walk your dog and meet your neighbors. These
Yeah.
become ways in which you start to slowly begin to develop relationships that are
Yeah.
helpful for you. And then after a certain period of time, and sometimes it's a matter of weeks, other times it's a matter of months, you begin to sort of become a source of inspiration because other
Mm.
people begin to see that
Mm.
you yourself have moved and transitioned. And so this is where I'd say we sort of recovered from the pandemic
Mm.
probably sometime in 2021, where we said, okay, we can reopen, we can find ways, it's going to be different, but we can live a new
Yeah.
reality. People were wearing
Right.
masks in some settings, but not in every setting. And then finally, the last stage of transition is when you begin to realize, okay, I'm stronger, I'm better having
Mm.
gone through all of these
Yeah.
challenges.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the redemptive note of Hinge Moments. I do
Yeah.
think that we will look back on the pandemic, and while there is much tragedy and much loss, I think also in God's providence, we can see other ways in which it's helped us to grow and develop individually and collectively. And I
Yeah.
hope and pray that that realization also helps us to better prepare for the challenges that lie ahead.